Hello learners, this lecture pertains to Unit 8 of the course MGPE 009 and the topic that we are going to discuss is Gram Swaraj today. I'm Dr. Shubhangi Vaidya from the School of Interdisciplinary and Transdisciplinary Studies at IGNOU. What are the aims and objectives of this lecture? We are going to try and understand the importance of rural India and the reasons for its underdevelopment. We will try to understand what constitutes a village republic. We will discuss the importance of the village in the Gandhian model of development and enumerate the basic principles of Gram Swaraj and its relevance today. Let's begin by taking stock of an overview of issues pertaining to rural India. It is often said that India lives in her villages. This is a truism, as nearly 70% of the population continues to live in rural India, despite the growing trend of urbanization and migration that we have observed, particularly over the last few decades. The importance of rural India to India's economy, politics, society, and culture is, however, undeniable. And agriculture continues to be the most important sector of the majority of our population for the purposes of livelihood and employment. Yet, this sector is facing a crisis, and a large section of the rural population lives in an extremely high risk and unpredictable environment. A large section of the population lacks even the basic services like education, health, safe drinking water, sanitation, and they experience unemployment and disguised employment on a massive scale. Providing rural India with better access to services, technology, education, and healthcare will reduce inequality, alleviate poverty for hundreds of millions of India's citizens, and promote growth of India's economy. However, many scholars and writers believe that the model of development that India has adopted in the post-independence period has not been able to alleviate the sufferings of the rural population. What are some of these important problems? Firstly, the declining share of agriculture in the gross domestic product. Unemployment and underemployment, as discussed earlier. Concentration of land in few hands, landlessness and marginalization of agricultural laborers is an extremely pressing issue. The subdivision and fragmentation of land holdings, making them economically unviable. And poverty and hunger, leading to large-scale migration to towns and cities, where these migrants continue to live on the margins, doing precarious work. Lack of food security, health measures, education, etc. continue to trouble a large segment of rural India. Very, very importantly, environmental issues, the issue of land losing its fertility and becoming uncultivable due to extremely unsustainable agricultural practices that have been used for a very long time. This also has its impacts on human health. We are all aware of the way in which constant exposure to certain kinds of chemicals causes all kinds of consequences on human health and certain diseases, such as cancers, for example, which have become very, very common due to frequent and long-term exposure to certain fertilizers, insecticides, and so on. Indebtedness is another very, very major problem that is faced in rural India. And as we all know, there has been a slew of farmer suicides in recent years as they find themselves saddled with large loans which they are unable to repay. The gender gaps and disparities also are a very, very important issue of concern. We find that rural women, the life of rural women is extremely hard. We see that they have to trek for very, very long distances to gather water, fuel, and fodder. The condition of rural girls and women continues to be deplorable, and the back-breaking labor that they perform, both within the household and on the fields and farms, really continues to elude or continues to not be captured adequately by our economists and policy makers. Let us look now at the Gandhian model of village development, which in a way tries to address or tries to preempt some of these problems that we have discussed so far. Now, as we know, in Gandhi's view, development is multifaceted. It is never just about the economy or about the political system or about the social system. Development is a multifaceted concept which takes into account all the dimensions of human life. People need courage and self-respect to disentangle themselves from slavish mentality developed over centuries of bondage. Gandhi's entire critique of colonialism rests on this notion that the colonial enterprise has enslaved millions of people all over the world, and breaking free from this bondage is crucial to his understanding of Swaraj and Gram Swaraj. Politics, educational, social reform, economy and technology had to suit the genius of the society. So any attempts at reforming society has to take into account the social and cultural realities of that society, rather than imported ideas which may not really fit into the social and cultural setup. Gandhi was intensely concerned about poverty and wanted to utilize the energy of the rural unemployed to produce more goods for the nation and some wealth for themselves. Progress was to be measured in terms of human happiness, and he also wanted a social order that would secure the greatest good of all, so that society could be built, or a sort of society could be built in which everyone would have equal opportunity and freedom to develop. There is a perception that Gandhi was anti-technology. Indeed, it has been argued by many that because of his reluctance to embrace modern technology, Gandhi is in some sense antiquated or irrelevant in the present context. However, we see that as early as 1936, he observed that there would be no objection to villagers using even the most modern machine and tools if they can make and afford to use them. He was against the exploitation of villagers by the cities and always had the common people in mind. He visualized electricity, shipbuilding, ironworks, machine making and the like existing side by side with village handicrafts. So we have to bear in mind that he did not critique mechanization, he did not critique modern technology for its own sake. He critiqued it because of the impact that it had on the livelihoods and on the self-sufficiency of the large mass of society. So industrialization was planned so as to destroy the village and village crafts. But under Gandhi's thinking, nothing would be allowed to be produced by the cities which could be produced by the villagers. Once again, bear in mind, Gandhi was talking in a context of colonialism, wherein the colonial enterprise leached or exploited the village, destroyed rural handicrafts for the development of the Western world. Gandhi preferred to replace large-scale manufacture by cottage production, and that only cottage and village industries could bring prosperity back to India. This is a view in which he was opposed by many of his closest associates. The whole notion that industrialism or industrialization could only be inimical to the interests of India did not sit very well with the development discourse. Gandhi did not aim at eradication of all machinery, but only at its limitation. It was the political and economic compulsions of the time that forced him to take a rigid stand against heavy industries. As we've mentioned, the British had totally ruined Indian village economy, and Gandhi felt that in case India went in for heavy industrialization, the poorer sections of society could never recover from the blow. And therefore, His entire ideology was molded fundamentally by his concern for the rural masses. In Gandhi's Swaraj, the cities and towns really did not find a place. According to him, the prosperity of the city is at the cost of the villages. The poor villages are exploited by foreign governments and also by their own countrymen. Villagers produce the food and go hungry, and cities seem to be draining their very lifeblood. He regarded the growth of cities as unfortunate for humankind and the world, and considered their growth as only a symptom of the entire malady. The cities are perfectly capable of taking care of themselves, but they must also realize the duty of making an adequate return to the villages for the strength and sustenance which they derive from them, instead of exploiting them. And according to Gandhi, the exploitation of villages is itself organized violence. And it follows that if Swaraj has to be built on non-violence, then the villages should get their proper place in the scheme of things. And therefore, in Gandhi's thinking, there was an urgent need to reconstruct the villages and establish village Swaraj. Gandhi was of the view that if villages perish, India will also perish. He constantly reminded us that India is to be found not in the few cities, but in its lakhs of villages. His constructive program for building life in the countryside became an integral part of the total program of Gandhi. And he wanted a society in which every person would have equal opportunity and freedom to develop. For him, the villages were the nerve centers of India. And if India were to develop and prosper, it should not copy the European model of development, but develop a model or evolve a model that would suit its own conditions. Let's talk about Gandhi's plan for village reconstruction. Behind his insistence on village economy, there was a much larger design, a grand design for a new kind of a civilization, which was based on sustainable development in the real sense of the word. He wanted the human intrusion into the functioning of the biosphere to be minimized by closing human-dominated systems, such as cities and industrial activities, to the point where their net effects on the biosphere approximated those of the natural systems that they have replaced. In other words, no other system of human settlement can achieve this except the village. We see here very clearly that Gandhi's ecological and environmental thinking was way ahead of its time, and never has it been more relevant and more meaningful than in the contemporary context. Instead of a hierarchical or pyramidal form of society, in which there is a large base, that is the ordinary people, and the apex at the top, which is occupied by very few, but which in a sense dominates over the base. So where the apex is sustained by the base, this is the kind of a pyramidal form of society or a hierarchical form of society. He wanted a society based on oceanic circles, in which the individual would be at the center, sustained and sustaining the circles of cooperation and mutual interdependence, in which all humans are embedded. Therefore, the system would be a cooperative system. The system would not be a hierarchical one, but one in which each element of the system is intertwined and is taking care of the interests of the other. In such a system, none will be the first and none the last. And in the final analysis, the unit of society, according to Gandhi, should be a village or a manageable small group of people who would be self-sufficient as a unit and bound together in bonds of mutual cooperation and independence. What were the basic principles that formed his idea of rural reconstruction? These included communal unity, removal of untouchability, prohibition of alcohol, the use of khadi, promotion of village industries, upliftment of underprivileged classes and women, full employment, promotion of economic equality, and a self-sufficient village economy. We see here very clearly that his idea of rural reconstruction encompassed the economic, the social, the political, and the cultural realms. So, like we've mentioned before, it was a multifaceted idea of development. Above all, he advocated a simple life and for the development of moral values in society, and conceptualized an integrated rural development program that would serve the Indian needs the best. Let's talk about the concept of Gram Swaraj. What does it mean? What are its contents? So, as you know, the word Swaraj generally means self-governance or home rule. It lays stress on governance not by a hierarchical government, but by self-governance through individuals and through community building. The focus was on decentralization, and Gandhi thought it necessary to evolve a mechanism to achieve the twin objectives of empowering the people and empowering the state. And it was for this that he developed the twin-pronged strategy of resistance to the state and reconstruction through voluntary and participatory social action. Although the word Swaraj means self-rule, Gandhi gave it the content of an internal revolution that encompasses all spheres of life. At the individual level, Swaraj involves the capacity for dispassionate self-assessment, ceaseless self-purification, and growing self-reliance. Politically, Swaraj is self-government, and it means a continuous effort to be independent of government control, whether it is the foreign government or the national government. And economically, Swaraj means full economic freedom for the toiling masses. Thus, we see that the term Swaraj has a communitarian and economic as well as a deeply personal connotation. His idea of Gram Swaraj aimed at the formation of villages having a self-sufficient economy. Human happiness combined with full mental and moral growth were the goals of this society. And self-sufficiency in basic needs was fundamental to achieving Gram Swaraj. Food, clothing, and other basic necessities, according to him, should be produced at the village level itself. This would lead to full employment, which would prevent people from migrating to the city in search of employment and better opportunities. Gandhi's ideal village was basically a place which encouraged community life to thrive, where there was perfect sanitation. Remember, Gandhi was very, very particular about cleanliness and sanitation. Harmonious coexistence with nature, democratic system of self-governance through the panchayat, and cooperation in all aspects of social, economic, and civic life. Let's quickly go over some of the basic principles that underlay Gram Swaraj. So, some of these are the supremacy of human beings, which finds its expression in full employment. Body labor, wherein human beings use their hands, use their labor to produce the goods that they need. This gives them a sense of worth and is associated with dignity of labor. Equality. So basically, all citizens, all human beings are equal, and this hit out at the kinds of endemic and structural inequalities that we see, for instance, in the caste hierarchy. Gandhi's notion of trusteeship, about which no doubt you will have had several lectures and the courses that you have undertaken, so we will not discuss very much about it in the present lecture. However, we see that trusteeship is a very, very core or essential aspect of his overall scheme pertaining to Swaraj and Gram Swaraj. Decentralization, which we have hinted at throughout the course of this lecture. Swadeshi, self-sufficiency, cooperation, satyagraha, equality of religions, panchayati raj, and a new system of education, a holistic system of education, which we term as Nai Talim. How has Gandhi's vision of Gram Swaraj panned out or played out in the contemporary context? It is worth examining. We see that his notion of Gram Swaraj aimed at an individual's development, character building, and the growth of basic human values for the development of the community. But the way our Panchayati Raj system in its present form addresses these problems is, of course, a matter of debate. The 73rd Amendment Act was brought about to confer a constitutional status on the panchayats, but except in a few states, the situation remains largely unchanged. And people's participation in the development of the villages is missing, as the Gram Sabhas rarely meet to discuss village development plans. Unemployment is increasing, environmental degradation is a major problem, the village community is fragmented, people do not participate in the development process, and there is a breakdown of village and cottage industries, resulting in large-scale migration to the cities. The answer to some of these problems lies in adopting the Gandhian model of village reconstruction, where every village will be self-dependent and self-sufficient to meet its basic needs, and the individual will have enough to lead a life of dignity. Gandhi thought of the villages as a starting point in the crusade for a better and a more peaceful world order. To sum up what we have discussed in this lecture, Gandhi was a visionary who accurately predicted the social and ecological consequences of the exploitative model of development based upon mechanization, industrialization, and urbanization. He offered an alternative vision, taking into account the ground realities of our country and the needs of its people. His philosophy offers a practical way to a peaceful social revolution to improve the quality of life for all deprived people of the world. By advocating for a non-violent, democratic, cooperative system of economic, political, and social life, he foregrounded the importance of both the individual and the community and a moral order. Thank you.